everybody, it's me, I'm MattHawes of the Happy Show, and I'm here today on August 11th, 2008 with another video vlog. Yay! Oh boy, what am I going to do today? Well, I'm going to tell you of 10 different recording artists and or groups that really have great albums that I think you all should listen to. In fact, I consider them some of the best albums of all time. Now, that's my personal opinion, and I'm not going to go into this with some deep, scholarly kind of examination, interpretation, or anything like that. I'm just going to tell you basically why I enjoy this music and why I consider it some of the best of all time. As a rule, for it to be on this list for me, it has to be, the majority of it has to be something really cool, and in most of these cases, I do like the entire album. But most stuff you're going to see on here is going to be either pop, rock, or alternate rock, with, you know, all forms of rock. And I'm going to put some links over here of probably one song representing each album I mention. A link, because I'm sure I could find somebody on YouTube has put up a video with either an actual music video by that group or artist, or they're going to put up something. But I'm sure I could find something to represent each of these bands I named. Let's get to it. No big surprise, the Beatles are going to be on there, and they would actually be the number one for me. Why? Because there's so much about the Beatles. They were truly trendsetters. It's far more reaching than just music itself. And to this day, I don't know how anybody can argue this. Even if you don't like the Beatles, how can you argue the impact of the Beatles? Because to this day, 40 years plus, we still know, you know, kids of all ages know who the Beatles are, and they influence, still to this day, musicians and different artists of all kinds. I consider them an influence on me, even though I'm not a musician. So here we go, the Beatles with Sgt. Pepper. A lot of critics, the more serious-minded, lofty critics out there, will say Revolver is actually the better album. And while it's a great album, I love all the Beatles albums, Sgt. Pepper still to me is the top dog. Now, that's the thing for the Beatles with me, is I limit it to two. I picked two of their albums that I want to mention here because I could pick almost every single album they did. But Sgt. Pepper is the top dog out of the Beatles for me. I enjoy psychedelic music, even though I've never done an illegal drug in my life. I've never done any hallucinogenic drugs or anything. But something about the Beatlesque psychedelia music. I'm not so much a fan of the garage band version of psychedelic music, but I like the Beatlesque kind of psychedelic music, and this, of course, is the masterpiece of that. And then Abbey Road from 1969. That is technically their final album, even though Let It Be was released afterwards. And there's so many great songs on there, and it's just when I'm in a different kind of frame of mind from Sgt. Pepper, Abbey Road fills the bill. I mean, it's, you know, I don't think it's a big surprise to anybody that it's a great album who is a big Beatles fan there, and that's the next one. Oh, and let me point out, anything like Sgt. Pepper, anything with A Day in Life, how could it not be at the top, right? Next, TRex, Tyrannosaurus Rex originally. It was headed by Mark Bolan. In fact, Mark Bolan was the guy who wrote all the music and such for the band. And this album came out in 1971. It's Electric Warrior. It's their most popular and most well-known album. And that's not a mistake. I mean, it's because it is truly the best work that they did, even though I love a lot of the stuff before and after that Mark Bolan did with his band. And I stress Mark Bolan because truly the vision of the group is Mark Bolan. I don't mean to slight any of the other members, but if you didn't have Mark Bolan, there would be no T-Rex. And most U.S. people, most of us in the U.S., we know it from Bang a Gong Get It On, which was the same pop hit that Robert Palmer with the group Power Station made into, I guess it was a #1 hit in 1985 doing their cover of it, but it was originally T-Rex's song and Mark Bolan's. And then also a lot of people who watched the movie Billy Elliot would recognize the song Cosmic Dancer, which also comes from this. Mark Bolan was also a comic book fan, and he slipped references into his songs sometimes. On this album, you have Doctor Strange referenced, which is a Marvel character. On another album, you have the Silver Surfer. There's a song called The Avengers. I haven't ever fully understood if that song is supposed to be the comic book characters, the TV show, or just something else in Mark Bolan's mind. But considering that he already had comic book leanings, I kind of like to think that even that song was based off of the comic books. Okay, now let's go to the next one. Smashing Pumpkins, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness from 1995. Now, I'll be honest, this is one of those, I don't necessarily like every track, but I like the grand total. It's a double album, basically. So there's a lot on there anyway. But I think it is definitely the masterpiece for the Smashing Pumpkins, and there's a lot of great stuff on there. And it was a big album when it came out in 1995, and rightfully so. There's just something about the music and everything that I enjoy so much. I mean, you can see the progression. A lot of these bands, you see the progression with their big albums like this from what they began as, and I think that's where Billy Corgan reached the zenith of his abilities there. And I mean, there's been some good stuff afterwards, but that was, to me, that was the height. Green Day, American Idiot. Now, when they first came onto the scene in the early 90s, early mid-90s, I wasn't, I enjoyed the Dookie stuff and all that as much as probably anybody who was into just pop and rock music or pop punk or whatever you want to call it. But American Idiot is, I think, genuinely accepted as being their masterpiece, and again, it's warranted. There's a reason for it. Great album from beginning to end. There's not a bum song on the album. I think it's awesome job. And I wasn't a big Green Day fan before this, but when I heard this, there's, to me, no disputing. This is a great album. Okay, next one, Radiohead, OK Computer. Radiohead, it was always a bit different than the rest of the crowd with their, they're, I guess, thrown in under the label of alternative rock. And same as Smashing Pumpkins and a few others I'll name here. But OK Computer is great. Okay, Flaming Lips. I'm going to name 3 albums off this because the Flaming Lips are awesome. And they started out in the early 90s, and one of the more popular hits that people still may remember is a song called She Don't Use Jelly. But I personally think that that they really became into their own whenever they were always different and unique, but they really found their voice, I think, with the late 90s and 1999 with the Soft Bulletin, which a lot of critics consider one of the best albums, if not the best album of the 1990s. And then Yoshimi Yoshimi battles the Pink Robots in 2002, and At War with the Mystics in 2006. Now, I wasn't sure how I felt about At War with the Mystics. It's one of those that repeated listening made me realize, no, I think of it almost equally but different as the other albums. I do think Soft Bulletin still edges out the other two, but Yoshimi, I have a fondness for quirky, kind of cosmic themes, and the whole idea of this Yoshimi battling robots. But anyway, let's go next. Modest Mouse, Good News for People Who Love Bad News from 2004. When I first heard this, I didn't even know or realize that how big the album itself had become. I think it's one of their bigger albums too. I just heard it from a friend that hadn't even heard of them before this. Since then, I've listened to their other tracks. And I guess the most popular song off this thing is probably Float On. And another awesome, great album. I think it's great from beginning to end. And it's experimental, but at the same time, reminiscent of other kind of musical things you might have heard in the past. And give it a listen. Alanis Morissette, Jagged Little Pill from 1995. Probably the biggest thing outside the Beatles on this list of mine, because that thing was a mega hit in 1995. And to be honest with you, because it was played so much, I didn't really keep listening to it in later years because I heard it so much. But it is a great album, despite how popular it became. Because to me, great is great. It doesn't matter if one person likes it or a million people like it. It's great. Okay, go on to the next thing because I don't want to run out of time here. Jellyfish. If you're a fan of Beatles, Queen, the Beach Boys by Brian Wilson, whenever he led the group and all this, you can't help but love Jellyfish, which is kind of a mix of all that, but yet, again, like a lot of these bands, it's still its own thing. And Jellyfish has been a big influence on a lot of bands that, even if a lot of people aren't aware of them because they never became, even in the MTV generation, never became like this big mega group, even though they probably should have been. But their albums, both, the 2 albums they released, Bellybutton from 1992 and Spilt Milk from 1993, are masterpieces in their own right, and both are awesome. And then there's Imperial Drag, which was formed by ex-member Roger Joseph Manning Jr. and Eric Dover, both from Jellyfish at one point. Roger Manning Jr. was, along with Andy Sturmer, the two main guys in Jellyfish, arguably, I guess, but I think they're the 2 main people there with direction. Imperial Drag was released in 1996, and it was kind of a blend of some of the stuff you might have heard on Jellyfish, but with more of a glam rock leaning to it, more in line with stuff like the TRex and all that. But it itself, awesome, great. So that's my recommendations and what I think is some of the greatest music, rock pop music of the decades. So again, give me your response, and that's my video vlog for today. Yeah!